I would say I had kind of a paradigm shift in that I began to look at things that made me uncomfortable as opportunities instead of obligations. I think the big thing there is like I said, I went into this experience having a plan and determined to come a certain way, and then learned something about the part of the business that I didn't know and loved it so much that I made it my focus to try to get back to there. So there was kind of a shift in career plan, if you will.
Hey there, this is David Mariano, and welcome to episode number 67 of Finance Career Launch, the show that helps you own your career. This podcast is one component of the Finance Career Launch member community, which provides the training and support to help you develop, contribute, and advance. And if you're not a member yet, go ahead and register for no charge by visiting financecareerlaunch.com and clicking that big blue button. When you do that, you'll get instant access to the video series, The 7 Pillars of a Successful Career in Finance, along with some other great stuff. Now, career advancement doesn't come solely from hard work. No matter what your original career plan is, it is always smart to remain open to changes and embrace them as opportunities. Sometimes pushing through uncomfortable situations will actually accelerate your career. Today's guest is James Hussney. James is now a director with KeyBank's Loan Syndicate Sales and Research Group, but he started his career with a different plan, with something else in mind. He was an investment banking intern in the M&A group and believed this is where he wanted to be, but he ended up choosing a different path after learning something he didn't know about the business and himself. This whole conversation with James is amazing. It's very rich and honest about staying open to possibilities, shifting your plan, embracing discomfort and tough situations, and the value of mentorship. Listen closely because most likely you will face something similar to what James has, and you'll want to think back to this conversation and emulate some of the ways in which he handled himself, because I really look up to him for how he handled some of the situations he's been through and just how he's navigated his career. And he's ended up accelerating his career path because of it. So please enjoy this conversation with James Hussney. All right, James, I'd love to just get started by you telling us who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. My name is James Hussney. I'm right now a director and part of KeyBank Capital Markets and our Debt Capital Markets Group. My focus is within our Loan Syndicate Sales and Research Group. So I work as part of the broader loan distribution platform, and we really syndicate loans that are anything from companies that are multinational investment grade companies all the way down to smaller, more regional middle market companies, companies that are owned by private equity sponsors, public companies, family-owned companies. So a really broad array of transactions that we work on, both opportunistic and strategic, be it general corporate need financings, refinancings, and the bulk of our efforts of late have been towards financing M&A activity.
And when you say loans, sales, syndication, what is the situation that requires the need for the syndications group within a bank?
Yeah, it's really when the size of the debt facility is too large for one lender. Best example would be if KeyBank has a client who wants to do something strategic and let's say needs a loan for, call it $250 million. because of the way our banking system is governed and because of the way we measure risk, there's always going to be what you call a hold limit or a hold level, a desired amount that KeyBank or any other lender would want to have. So essentially, we're distributing the risk anything beyond what our appetite as the agent would be to hold.
Got it. And it's, from what I understand, it's a group that interfaces with multiple groups and teams within the bank and then other banks. So talk about that, not the process necessarily, but kind of the dynamics of the people that you're dealing with and how to bring a deal together, how that happens.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple sides to it. There's the internal aspect of the different lines of business, as we call it, or different product partners that we work with on a deal team. And then there's the external part of this. There's the borrower or the issuer, as we would refer to them. And then there's the investing clients that we work with too, be it other banks that are going to lend to these companies, other institutional investors. Some of them are finance companies, some of them are mutual funds, hedge funds, also do a fair bit of work with these structured vehicles that you've been seeing in the news that are called collateralized loan obligations, and even BDCs. So it's a variety of characters that we're bringing together. If we start internally, everything we work on would be with a deal team. It could be as small of a deal team as somebody that's been the longtime relationship manager for whatever the company is, depending on the situation. And this is really the point person, the primary line of contact for the company, the continuous day-to-day discussions. And then the deal team begins to morph and add in layers as the opportunities would permit. A lot of that has to do with the advice that we would give them. Let's say there's a family-owned business that's grown steadily over the past 10 or 15 years. The owner of the business wants to do something strategic in terms of buying growth, so they're going to buy a similar company that's a little bit smaller than them. Part of the need they would have is some debt financing in order to make that happen. And in comes our M&A partners who would offer the valuation advice. And then we would come into the picture to explain to this company, really usher them through the process, what their borrowing cost is going to be, what type of lenders they're going to be working with, not just to raise the money, but over the life of the loan, who you're in bed with, so to speak, how they're going to behave. Are they going to be a partner for growth, or are they going to be more of a stringent partner to have? And we'll walk the company through all of those different aspects. So you're balancing a lot of dynamics. Internally, I like to think of our internal partners as sort of clients, understanding, how they're going to advocate for the companies that they're giving advice to. What's the strategic interest of their growth? What are the industry dynamics that they're dealing with? If it's, for example, a chemicals banker, where are we in terms of the cycle, and how is that going to impact what other companies this banker is going to want to have as part of his deal resume? And so all of that comes into play in the decision-making of how we look for new business, the idea generation that we have. And then the other factor is when you're actually working with the client, who's the borrower. The growth of these companies is at stake, and a lot of them want a good deal of comfort to how much flexibility they're going to have going forward. We try to make it our focus to let them focus on the integration of the business they're acquiring, or using whatever the need for money is going to be. Let them focus on that, and we'll handle the lender group for them. So essentially, you can think of a syndicated loan as really the aggregation of a bunch of smaller loans by one agent bank, if you will, who can handle all of that aggregation needs for you.
Got it. And you mentioned the word trading at the beginning. Does the trading happen when that agent bank has a client, they have a large need, and they end up parsing out pieces of that loan? Is that where the trading comes in?
Yeah, more so, I would say post-crisis than ever. You've seen a convergence in behavior of lenders that are lenders to loans and lenders to bonds. And liquidity is very important. The trading aspect, Dave, happens more depending on who the lender group is. If your lender group is primarily commercial banks that are banking for purposes of a relationship, no different than Key would have, and have day-to-day interests with whoever the company is, you see less trading. If your lender group is institutional investors that I talked about before, again, to the likes of mutual funds or insurance companies that like the senior secured nature of a bank loan and the safety as opposed to what you would get out of a bond, they also like the liquidity in terms of managing their portfolios and positions. So the agent bank would provide that liquidity in the sense of understanding what lenders are there in this group, what lenders have more appetite for this deal versus what lenders would have a certain reason to minimize their exposure or reduce the exposure to any particular transaction. Sometimes it's not even company related. Sometimes it's portfolio related. If maybe they're overweighted in a sector and need to lighten up in certain names, they would come to us to facilitate a trade for them.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. I want to go back a little bit because you haven't always been in this group, right? You've kind of had a career journey, and I'd love to go back to where you started and then how you got to your current spot.
Yeah, I've jumped around quite a bit, but always with the same company or family of companies, if you will. My career started actually with an internship, which was with McDonald Investments when I was at Case, and that kind of evolved as our platform evolved. So I began as an analyst with McDonald. My focus was more M&A related. Quickly after that, Key Bank, who had purchased McDonald Investments, decided to integrate the two platforms. You had McDonald Investments that had a good, strong middle market investment banking practice that was industry focused. And then you had Key's corporate banking that had also an industry discipline, industry focus. And those two industries overlapped really for the two franchises. There was an existing industrial focus for both. There was an existing healthcare focus for both. So, and there was a few others as well. So they put all of the bankers together who were industry bankers from the investment banking side and the commercial banking side, and required both sides to become both. So no longer did you have a commercial banker or an investment banker. You just had bankers. And a lot of that took place throughout our industry after the fall of Glass-Steagall. You saw B of A do the same thing. Wachovia did the same thing. I think we were maybe the only middle market platform that did that. And as part of that, you've got a lot of, industry change brings about career change for everybody. And part of the strong advice I got internally was to cross-train in both credit and valuation. The company had a rotational program that was 2 or 3 years, depending on how you came into it. And that required analysts and associates to go through different rotations between 6 months or a year. And when I say rotations, it was really a job as opposed to kind of a temporary stop. And depending what the business need was, and it involved some sort of credit or underwriting analysis, and also some investment banking experience as well, so that you could be cross-trained. And I did that. One of my stops there was in syndicated loans. I will say I went into the training program thinking I'll do my rotations, get my cross-training, and then I'll come back as a stronger M&A banker. And once I got into the rotational process, I stopped in syndicated loans, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the product. I loved the work. I loved the focus, the nature of the pitching. And so when I finished my rotations, I made a couple more stops along the way, both in an underwriting and an investment banking capacity. And then KeyBank decided to grow out further their syndicated loans platform, and had a need for somebody with both a commercial and investment banking experience. And so I raised my hand and ended up in this group ever since. I think the big thing there is like I said, I went into this experience having a plan and determined to come a certain way, and then learned something about a part of the business that I didn't know, and loved it so much that I made it my focus to try to get back to there. So there was kind of a shift in career plan, if you will. Since then, I've been part of Key's syndicated loan practice since 2005, different capacities, anywhere from, my career's evolved from an associate level all the way up now to a director. And I would say the biggest differences have been changes that have been brought about by growth in the business, not necessarily just applying for different jobs as they came available. So, my particular seat has just morphed over time with the business needs.
Got it. There's a couple things I want to dig into there. You said something very important about CrossTraining and the rotational program. Talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you got out of that. Number one, not everyone has that opportunity, but I think it's really a lost gift that, companies used to have a lot more. And I wish everyone had the opportunity to go through that. So talk a bit about some of those benefits. Oh, and the other thing is, as you said, you thought you wanted to end up in one spot, but because you saw those things, there are some good things that came out of it. So dig into that a little bit more and why that was so important.
Right. The rotational program, again, that was a function of changes in the industry, investment banks and commercial banks merging, a need to build a bench for a lot of larger commercial banks that were integrating investment banks. And so the trend was to have a formalized training program that involved certain classroom stuff, whether it's credit analysis or valuation or even seminars on mechanics of the banking system. And then there was the rotation. So our program was a little bit different than what I think other comparable programs were, in that the development goal was really to have a deep understanding and working experience on the credit side and on the valuation side of the business. Again, I did it more as a function of our organization is changing, and this is an opportunity for me to have more options. So I would say even today, where there's less formal rotational programs, if you look at people whose careers are excelling more quickly than others, especially at the kind of entry to mid-level, it's the people who almost create rotational programs for themselves that seem to do that. And a lot of that is because in the first 5 to 10 years of their career, they're broadening their knowledge base as much as possible. And I think the style of that is not to know a little bit about a lot, but to have a deep knowledge in several different areas. And you can put that knowledge together to be value add anywhere you end up long term. So I don't think it needs to necessarily be a formal program. For us, it involves working in different product groups and different industry specialties. Even there was a requirement for some time that we had to work in different cities just to have that understanding of the geographic dynamic, because the Boston market of banking is not going to behave the same way as the Cleveland market is. So that in terms of the rotations, I would say you can create your own rotational program. Part of that's going to require a good deal of mentorship, and the other part of it is kind of seeking a view from above, if you will, or from decision makers within the organization to figure out where the business needs are going to be on a year-by-year basis and what sort of opportunities may open up to you. The other question that you had was about me personally, right, in terms of starting along a track and doing a kind of a 70-degree shift to something else.
Yeah, I'm curious on what was it about? What did you think? Why did you think you wanted to end up back in M&A? And then what did you learn about yourself and maybe the business that said, this is better for me, or this is a better fit, or this is more attractive? What happened there?
I think it was more what I knew. I liken this a lot to whenever we go recruiting on college campuses, I ask the question for the people who want to have a career in investment banking or any sort of capital markets career, really, who wants to do M&A. And everybody kind of raises their hand. And then I always ask the question, well, who in this room was a pre-med student? And a lot of people typically raise their hands. And then the question is, well, why were you a pre-med student? And a lot of it was, well, that's all I knew. And similar to people who go into healthcare careers, a lot of them start out as pre-med, but maybe going into that learning track didn't know that you can do a lot with that that course material. You can go into some sort of anesthesia career or a PA track. There's all sorts of things that are parallel or part of the system that doesn't mean you have to be a doctor per se, right? And I think that's the same thing for a career in finance. As the industry changes, more types of jobs are created and more types of jobs open up. So when I came into it, M&A was really the only thing I knew. So to me, it was the greatest thing. And while I was doing it, I was enjoying it a lot and I was learning a ton. The advice I was given from all my mentors was, pick the option that's going to open up the most doors for you when you're coming out of college. And that track seemed to be the best for me. When I got into the rotational program, I started to learn, there's other jobs that involve the valuation toolbox that you can use to build on. When you're credit writing, you need to have an understanding of valuation because it impacts what kind of view you're going to have on repayment. I learned that through our training process. And then I ended up in syndicated loans and thought, wow, I really enjoyed the credit analysis side of things, but I also enjoyed the marketing of the M&A process. The pitching process, there's a certain element of a bake-off, if you will, in terms of who's going to win the deal. The marketing materials in terms of the presentations that you're making to tell the story of the company, the offering materials that you make in terms of an information memorandum or a book about this company. And I really learned how to write that from a credit perspective, too, not just who's going to buy this company, but also, what's the story of growth here? Is it sustainable? And how is whoever's lending to this company going to get their money back? So I would say a different angle of understanding, but building on an existing toolbox that I had. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the dynamics of this type of deal in a syndicated loan versus an M&A process. Thinking about it, really that decision came about kind of when I was 24, 25 years old. And I liked the fact that more of what I worked on actually ended up being a closed deal, as opposed to when I was working in M&A, there's a lot less certainty of close for the transaction. And the other thing I saw was, wow, here I'm exposed to so many different parts of the capital structure because oftentimes a loan is, first of all, it's related to an event. It could be a strategic event like an M&A event. But then loans are always the first stop for money. So after that comes maybe a bond issuance or an equity issuance. And so getting to be a part of all of those transactions was really exciting for me. And I was learning through a different variety of deals than what I had experienced before. And the other part of it is part of its circumstance, the types of clients that I got to work with, and the type of people that I got to work with. Candidly, there's the human aspect, Dave. The
Yep.
job that I ended up coming into happened to be with a group of people who were great mentors for me, and had a strong interest in my development and developing a bench, giving me opportunities where I could grow outside of what I saw other people at other firms were doing. And some of that was, frankly, putting more work on me than what I thought my peers were going to get, where I just kind of had to figure it out because it was a newer business for us and there wasn't an established infrastructure. So it was definitely ambiguous in that the business I joined is not the business that it is today. But it was a lot of fun being part of a business and a product that's growing in an industry that was relatively new and continues to evolve very quickly.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and I love what you said about kind of towards the end there of you found a group of people who were good mentors to you and would give you opportunities for growth, because I think that's something that I don't know if you've noticed as you get older becomes more important, or I guess you appreciate it more. At least I did. I didn't really come in with that lens of that's something that's important to me.
Mm-hmm. Dave, that is something that I'm more and more convinced of every year. If there's one thing I could tell everybody at all phases in life, not just if you're beginning your career, I think if your career is evolving, or even if you're at a more advanced stage of your career, I think the key to growth is really in mentorship, and that's no matter where you are in your career. It's something I think a lot of people don't put enough emphasis on. And mentorship doesn't necessarily just mean somebody you're going to work for. I think it's important to find mentorship of people with relevant experience, that also aren't necessarily involved in your day-to-day life, but are willing and excited to take a personal interest in your growth. And also people that you respect from a variety of aspects, not just their achievements, but their outlook on the world. Are they an example for you to follow as well? And the other thing, they're just as much a tool for us in that, I said it's somebody who's not part of your day-to-day life. They help a lot to take an emotion out of a decision and to help you see things in a black and white way from a perspective of what's going to be the best thing for me. Sometimes it's what's the best next step for me to take. But, also I've been the beneficiary of my mentor saying, I think you need to approach this situation differently, be it with a manager or even with a colleague when you're trying to work through a difficult situation. Sometimes it's, I'm just not able to communicate my point the right way. Sometimes it's, this is how you're heard. Other times it's, you should probably listen more than you should speak in this certain situation, and that's how you're going to learn and grow more. So mentorship is, I think, the biggest thing for anybody, regardless where you are in your career.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things you said there is about taking the emotion out of your decision, which is, as much as some people don't want to admit it, there's a lot of emotion in decisions and interactions, and it's really, it's a lot of it. And I think, having someone who can help you think through that in somewhat of an objective way is invaluable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. I'd love to move a little bit, change a little direction, and just talk a little bit about some of the things that maybe you've had to learn, had to possibly overcome, or just what have been some of the toughest things that you've had to learn, or to say it another way, maybe things that surprised you throughout your career that you weren't expecting and then hit you along the way?
Changes from above. So we can call this chapter, what happens when you have to work for somebody that you don't want to work for and it wasn't your choice. I think the hardest season for me in my career was, you get to a point where you figure out a career track that you're happy with. I was very happy in the syndicated loan path. growing kind of as planned or maybe a little bit faster than what my plan was. I had kind of gotten to the VP level. I think I really found my stride too, Dave. My performance was consistent. I knew what my strengths were. I knew where I needed to grow. And I had a really good rapport with the people that I was working for. And when I say rapport, it's a couple things. We knew how to communicate with each other. I understood what was expected of me. I understood how they wanted me to deliver things. And I also understood kind of what their goals were for me, the kind of, what's this person's role in the group, and a trust level. So I trust my boss. I trusted my bosses. They trusted me. And so we were in a really good place. Change happens. The people that I was working for in a couple different capacities decided to go pursue other career opportunities. And so here I am working for a whole new set of people that I didn't know. I didn't kind of understand how they wanted to work with me or how they wanted me to work for them. And in some cases, it was really difficult. Some of that fault, frankly, was mine, in that, I kind of came into that relationship hoping or expecting that I'd just kind of pick up where we left off and do what I was doing before and everything would be the same. And that's a level of professional maturity I think we all can only learn when we switch jobs or we switch people that we work for. But the other thing was the unfortunate circumstance was the person that I was now working for was an external hire and didn't really fit the culture of the organization that I grew up in. So it was difficult on a lot of levels. Like, I didn't know what this expectation was from me. I also didn't understand how this person wanted me to work with them. And there wasn't really a trust level there. And I would say time went on and the trust level wasn't building. There just wasn't this clicking. So you come to a fork in the road. Well, do you find something else to do? Or do you figure out what this person wants? It was really challenging. I think, there were at times I was kind of reading the writing on the wall that there was a different strategic plan for the group, and maybe I didn't fit into that. And so, you go from a place in your career where you're doing really well and on the rise and you kind of get it to, okay, where am I now? What ultimately ended up happening is I had to go through, I would say, a series of humbling experiences and conversations. I went into it thinking, well, everything's happening to me. And again, going back to the mentorship, both people that I worked with and worked for, and even people from the outside who, like I said, took the emotion out of it for me and said, but how are you coming at it? What can you do differently here? Ultimately, I went into kind of discovery mode of, what makes me happy? What do I really like about my job? And I focused on that. I ended up taking a little bit of a shift and embarked on an opportunity that came up that my bank selected me for, to take a little bit more leadership in bridging different silos of the bank. And so I got to work on a couple different projects in a couple different areas. And lo and behold, like I said, changing tides. The guy that I was working for ended up leaving the firm very quickly. And I got to take on my old job, but even in a newer and larger expanded capacity. And what I learned along the way during that hiatus, if you will, or during that period of change, I got to use in my new role. So it was my old role plus, and you take what you learned and you do a better job with it. And that resulted in, instead of me kind of starting over, having to take a step back, ended up accelerating my career and speeding up my promotion track.
And that's all. I mean, that is so, it mirrors a lot of my story. So I understand exactly that all those feelings, but I love how you stuck it out. You know, a lot of people would just kind of, whether you talk about seeing the writing on the wall or not liking who they're working with, all those things you just talked about, a lot of people would go. What made you stay? What made you kind of tough it out and say, this is, I mean, in the end, it was the right thing because, like you said, you didn't have to start over. But what gave you the fortitude to stick in there?
Oh, I wish I could say hindsight or 2020 vision, but I think at that point, it was one day at a time, Dave.
Sure.
I really kind of rolled with each day and figured out where am I going to go tomorrow, or what's the next step for me. So there's two things: what kept me there, and why didn't I leave? Right. I think what kept me afloat was the advice I was getting, and really it was from a series of people. There was one gentleman who's one of the business leaders at our bank, who I had a working rapport with, who really took an interest in me, Dave, and my personal situation. And without me having to say it, he kind of knew what was going on. And it gave me a lot of coaching. And his coaching was not, you should be entitled to this or you should be entitled to that. His coaching was really around, here's a difficult situation. It started with, what do you have to be grateful for? And it made me realize that, I maybe took for granted the rapport that I had with my old boss and got too comfortable. And then somebody else taught me through that being in a zone where you're too comfortable is never good, because when you're too comfortable, you stop growing. So I would say I had kind of a paradigm shift in that I began to look at things that made me uncomfortable as opportunities instead of obligations. I really, some days were very taxing, and it was very difficult to come to work when at times you feel like the plan is for you to be worked out of this business that you're working in. And I really had to spend a lot of time thinking, okay, what do I like about this job, and what am I grateful for about where I am today? And I think that's what kept me hanging on, because ultimately, like I said, I was able to take some opportunities that were given to me in terms of, well, here's an additional project that you can work on. Here's an initiative that we're working on as well. And instead of saying, like, I don't have the capacity to do this, or, I'm a little bit overwhelmed right now, I think that shift of focus made me want that sort of exposure. And that got me back to where I wanted to be.
That's great. That's great, and great lessons in there. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
A couple more things just to wrap up. I mean, You've already been through a lot in your career, but you still have a long way to go too. At the end of your career, what do you want to have accomplished in terms of legacy, your impact? And I don't just mean, as a lender in the business, but what mark do you want to leave in the business community when you're done?
I would like to make some sort of impact in that I would have influenced the way people look at things or the way they do business. The greatest honor I think that you can give someone is to say, well, there was this guy at KeyBank, if you remember, he worked there, who used to look at situations from this perspective. And so I would love to maybe have an influence that affects or changes the way people look at things conventionally. How does that apply to syndicated loans? Sometimes you don't always have you don't always have to do things as though we're applying a template to any sort of situation. So I would love to encourage people to look at things from a different angle and figure out how you can get something done in a way that nobody thought of before. And I think for the people that I've worked directly with or that have worked for me or that I've worked for, I would like to think that I could leave behind some best practices in terms of, you approach things with a certain attitude, you approach things with a certain level of integrity too. And you build long-term relationships based on that. There's, like I said earlier, with who you're working with, right? Did I build a level of trust with the people that were my clients and the people that were my teammates? And did I lead in a way that set an example that taught them to look at things from a different scope, not just necessarily what our vocational training teaches us?
Love it. I love it. One last question.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any lessons that you can point to from either real people in your life, some things that really stand out that you were taught, or it could be something from a book, from an author that you really like and a book you really want to point people to?
Wow, that's broad.
I guess to sum it up, I mean, where do you find inspiration? What sources of information or people make you want to be better?
Okay. A few different categories here. One, there's the people that I'm surrounded with, directly and indirectly, that you can say this person has done really well for themselves, but I also like the way they're living their life. And we try to emulate those behaviors. I want to go back really quickly to the point on mentorship, Dave. The reason why I think that's so important, because even the people who have reached, I would say, their aspirations in terms of wealth or lifestyle, what they've done with their lives, I find that the most successful of those people whose success continues until a lot of them, some of those people, I've gone to their funeral and lived very long, influential, successful lives, always had somebody ahead of them that was their coach, right? And so I think there's people that we're surrounded by, be it socially, professionally, or even, if you call it in your faith community too, that are going to have an impact on you as a person. And so I would tell everybody, identify those people no matter where we are in our lives, seek their advice, emulate their behaviors. For me, I don't think it's one certain book that has influenced me. We all have read those certain books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, et cetera, and they affect the way we look at things. But I would say my key is there was a guy that I worked with a while ago who was a really good example, and he always had a proverb for everything. And so I love to look at those. The proverbs are like, little tidbits of wisdom that you can apply in different situations when you've got so I've got a fork in the road here. There's always some sort of little proverb that you can apply to it. And so I love those. I've got a desk full of proverbs. And I actually, whenever I see one, even if it's on a billboard or something like that, and I like it, I write it down. Actually, I've changed that. Now I'm snapping them and posting them on my Instagram so that I never forget them. And social media. That's the other thing. I found LinkedIn is a tremendous tool now because people are using it as a way to communicate their accomplishments, their moves, and you can really use it to. I don't think people should substitute their relationships with LinkedIn. That's tempting, but it's a good way to keep tabs on people. Stay in touch with them. Talk to them, let them know that you're happy for their successes or that they're of interest to you in terms of what they're doing. And some people, I would say, I've seen people are even out of a job and they're just in need of some encouragement. And it goes both ways. I find you don't always have to be the taker. Sometimes when you give a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of advice, you get a lot more out of it too.
Hey there. hope you really enjoyed this conversation with James. I did. I appreciate how honest he was with us and sharing his story. If you did enjoy this, I'd love to ask you one favor. Please go over to iTunes, give the show a rating or a review. It's very easy. It'll take you 5 minutes. Click 5 stars or however many stars you think the show is worth it. Write a couple sentences about why you like it and click submit, and that would be great. It helps the show get visibility and helps more people hear the messages in the show who need it. I appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.